Here at ASU+GSV Summit in Salt Lake City. We're live, and this last interview of the day is with David Wiley, who is a pioneer of open education resources. He is a co-founder of the company Lumen Learning and an adjunct professor at Brigham Young University of instructional psychology and technology. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and just to remind everyone, I know people stuck around probably today, but the format is we're gonna have a conversation for a little bit, and then we'll invite in the crowd to ask a couple questions too. I have been struck about OER having its moment. It seems to me, these open education resources, but you've been doing this since before it was cool. What got you into this in the first place? What triggered this for you?
Oh, gee, this is such a sappy sounding story to tell, but so I'm from West Virginia originally.
Okay.
As I was finishing my undergrad, I became the university's first webmaster at Marshall University.
Oh man, I remember that word, webmaster.
Webmaster.
Yeah, that sounds kind of.
And this is at a time that the university had no idea what to do with this person. So, just as a little fun color, I shared an office and a secretary with the CIO.
Okay, so the person buying the enterprise and you,
right, and the webmaster, right? Because nobody knew who this person was. So
sure.
Anyway,
but you had a secretary. Anyway,
half a second. Okay. In that role, I was sitting at my desk one day. So this would have been what, 96, 97, somewhere in that time frame. And I was coding up this JavaScript calculator, which was the cutting edge of whatever.
Right. No one else had done this yet.
You could do it with JavaScript at the time, right? Anyway, just. I had this kind of realization, like clouds parting, like ray of light shining down on me. With this JavaScript calculator, I could build that calculator one time and 1 million people could use it. It was very different from the physical calculators that you had to wait your turn for the calculator to come around to use it at my elementary school. And of course, economists have a name for this. Everybody understood this before. It's not like I discovered something new about the nature of digital materials, but somehow in that moment, understanding that when things are digital, you can create them once, and then 1 million people can use them. It caused me to have this kind of diverging kind of path of my thoughts. One path of which was, this is how Bill Gates gets to be Bill Gates, right? You write software one time and then you just sell it, and it's like printing money, right? On CDs or floppy disks maybe at that time.
1997, yeah.
Right. But the other thing was, if you can figure out how to fund the initial development, then everybody could use it for free. And I just remember, I don't know if you've had this kind of moment in your life where this realization kind of hits you and you feel like, I'm obligated in some moral sense of the word. Like, now that I understand this, I'm responsible to go do something. And it was downhill from there, I guess.
So you did. You're still doing it.
I'm still doing it, 20 years later now.
And I guess it was a journey to get to being involved and starting a company. At first you were doing more, kind of grassroots. What is this is a theme that I feel like comes up a lot, especially in an event like this, of company versus the company culture versus academic culture. And there's a lot of skepticism that remains. We've talked about that with some previous guests today, about the academy questioning companies. And you are somebody that was a tenured professor at Brigham Young, and then went off and gave up that gig to start a company. Why a for-profit company in your open kind of world of trying to make things free and accessible?
So, I co-founded Lumen with my partner, Kim Thanos, who is amazing, and had come out of the for-profit world, and I'd come out of the grant-funded university research center kind of world, and we sat on my porch, and argued about, should it be this, should it be that, what are the pros and cons, and really at the end of the day, it seemed like two things. Kind of the simplest one is, as a for-profit, there's access to additional kinds of funding and support that you just don't have access to as a nonprofit in terms of scaling and growth. But second, there's so many the bigger ones, there's so many nonprofits in the OER space that you could, if maybe 2 or 3 foundations would have a change in program officer who would change their funding priorities, you could take down a good chunk of the ecosystem. Because they're nonprofits, they're all grant funded, there are a couple of big funders in the space, and there's just not a lot of diversity.
You make it sound precarious.
It felt precarious. I'm going to leave a tenured job to go do this, right? So let's do this in the way that's most likely to have staying power and to have legs. And if a lot of the support that's coming to Lumen is actually coming in terms of services that we're offering, and people are recognizing value in that and paying for that, as opposed to being grant funded or something like that. That seems like it's ultimately more stable to the whims of how NSF is funding or how the Hewlett Foundation is funding or to what might happen there.
Have you faced any skepticism or pushback over that decision, though? Because
Every day.
How do you deal with that?
By doing good work. The thing that is really fun is there are other, as I said, most of the other people in the space are nonprofits, and it's fun to be on panels together with them, and then at the end, someone will raise their hand and ask a question and say, so I'm confused, so Lumen's a for-profit, or Lumen is a nonprofit, OpenStax, for example, you're a for-profit, how do you guys work together? And nobody ever gets that we're a for-profit. So what a lot of times, now I didn't have time this morning because we only had 7 minutes, but in a 30-minute or an hour-long talk, I'll spend a whole slide at the beginning of the presentation saying, Lumen is a for-profit. I want to make clear you understand we're a for-profit, because by the time I'm done, you're not going to believe me, and you're going to be really confused about that.
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure, and you're going to come back around and say, why did you try to snooker me into thinking you're a nonprofit? No, let's just be clear, that we're a for-profit. But we do peer-reviewed research. We publish in journals. We always pay the open access fee so that the things that we publish are out there and broadly available. As a matter of contract, every school that we enter into a partnership with, the contract says anything that we develop together will be openly licensed and available for the whole community to use for free. Kim had been in a lot of open source software. You're kind of startups. Kim Thanos, my partner, kind of coming into this, and I've been involved at Flat World Knowledge and at some other places coming in. We both had experience on the open and trying to make open sustainable side of things before. But I think we really have a commitment to the values of the open community, and it's critically important to us that we live those every day. And so that does end up being really confusing to people, even though we'll say again and again, remember, we're a for-profit. Somehow it doesn't get through.
It does feel like I think it could surprise a lot of people, especially because OER is such this open, free. It seems anti-commercial in its whole conception. So it's an interesting situation you put yourself in. Although I do understand the context.
But in some ways, we're kind of we're drafting behind. If you think about open content being 10 years behind open source,
right?
You look at Red Hat or even IBM now, right? The commercial players that I think Red Hat really is a better example because they're purely about adding value to the ecosystem that's formed around open source, right?
Sure.
And so for people for whom that metaphor makes sense, thinking about Lumen as a Red Hat for OER is a very simple way to communicate what it is we're trying to do. But a lot of people in the academic community have no idea who Red Hat is, so that metaphor doesn't actually help.
I see. But that's the way you feel like it's fairly portrayed. And that certainly a lot of our audience will understand that connection. So what has surprised you most in the growth of the idea of OER since '97?
Oh gosh, what surprised me the most? I think I'm constantly surprised at how slow and how fast it goes.
What's the fast part?
Like it feels. I don't know if you've ever heard anyone say like they became an overnight sensation after 10 years of hard work.
Sure.
But like in the last 2 years, we've gone from there. 3 years now. In the last narrow window, we've gone from there being no such thing as an entire degree that you could earn at a accredited traditional college, where every course you took was OER. That didn't even exist. And now 3 years later, there are 20 of them running and another 60 being actively worked on.
Is that called the Z degree? Is that the zero textbook?
So their Z degree is the Virginia language for it. They're called OER degrees other
OER
places. That seems like it went from nothing to a lot very quick, in just a couple of year period. That's been interesting to watch. It's interesting to see how the idea of Creative Commons and open licensing come into the education community, how people think about open licensing and kind of the nuances of that. And I think in education, we're so used to thinking I can close the door and do whatever I want to do because I'll just claim fair use if anybody catches me. But with the door closed, nobody's going to catch me doing whatever it is I'm doing anyway. And to help people who are educators think, no, actually, if we want to do things in public, in the view of the public, in a way where we're going to collaborate with others across institutions, we actually have to pay attention to copyright and care about it. And now that means if we want to do it publicly and collaboratively, it means we have to be open. We need licensing. And sometimes I'm surprised at how hard it is for people to appreciate that copyright matters.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that has also been an issue for so long. But you're right. I think there is this attitude of who's going to care enough to either prosecute or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And I think the other thing that I've been struck by in hearing some of your talks and reading some of your writing is that I think a lot of people think of this OER as like content is free instead of expensive, which that's certainly an interesting narrative. But I've been struck and surprised sometimes by other things that people in OER are talking about now, about things that changing the way the materials are used in class. And do you want to talk a little bit about rethinking assignments because of a different approach to the materials?
I mean, I think if OER were just about being free,
right,
then we would just use the internet, because CNN is free, EdSurge is free, Inside what the overwhelming majority of the internet is free.
Sure.
So that can't be what we're talking about. We have to be talking about something more than that. So OER are content that are free plus give you these permissions, right? These kind of open source style permissions where you can make modifications, you can make changes, you can share with others. And I think that I think it's important in a couple of ways to keep that permissions piece front and center when we talk about OER. First, kind of tactically, because publishers can always decrease their prices and say, well, we're not free, but we're really, really affordable, so we're basically the same as OER.
Sure.
And if you let the OER conversation be only about cost, then that feels true.
It's almost like a Walmart thing. It's just, if it's just about cost, just drive that down.
We'll cut our prices so that you keep using ours instead of converting to OER. But on the other side, there's the amount of interesting things pedagogically that are unlocked by the permissions is really what's most interesting to the majority of faculty. And the kind of 4 or 5 step formula for this is, if we believe that people learn by the things they do, we learn by doing. I think most people agree on that. It's certainly the function of copyright to prevent us from doing certain things, unless we've entered into licenses and have permission and stuff like that. And if we learn by what we do and copyright prevents us from doing certain things, that means copyright prevents us from learning in certain ways. Open gives those permissions back to us that copyright withheld. So open actually lets us learn in new ways that we simply cannot learn in the context of traditionally copyrighted materials.
Can you give an example, like in a professor's use of something? Or
So anytime when a faculty member has students engaged in remixing openly licensed material as a course assignment, for example. So a couple of interesting examples. There's a medical school faculty member at one of the UC schools who actually teaches a course, and I think it's something like Wikipedia in medical education or something like that, where med school students spend an entire semester on Wikipedia improving the quality and accuracy of writing on some topic related to general interest public health content, like diabetes.
Right.
And so the quality of the diabetes article is kind of dicey, and now this student goes in, does a lot of writing, revising of what's there, correcting, is interacting with the Wikipedia community as part of that process, and at the end of the semester has greatly improved the quality of that article. Well, you could have spent the whole semester just writing a research paper about diabetes and turning it in and getting it graded, and then you would have looked at it and thrown it away. But now that student knows that what they've done is a contribution to the broader community that's going to be viewed millions of times just in the next year, probably, right? Wikipedia is an interesting example, but there are plenty of others. I've had examples in my own work of pulling, so I used to teach a class called Project Management for Instructional Designers. There is no textbook called Project Management for Instructional Designers. I think it's taught at like 60 schools around the country or something. It's only in a graduate program on EdTech.
Not a big enough market even for a publisher.
No. Yeah. But I did find an open project management book, meant really for a business school audience. And as I looked at that, I thought, oh my gosh, the amount of work it's going to take to change this from, every example, all the little case studies in it. I kind of had this lazy moment of realization that I should engage the students in transforming this book into the book that it needed to be. And so, that course over a couple of semesters became really a process of pairing students up into 2s or 3s, having them say, we're interested in kind of this angle, and we're going to start at chapter 1, and we're going to improve the book in this way throughout the term. So, this morning I talked about a group of students that shot video case studies that went out and found practicing project managers of e-learning projects, interviewed them about each chapter topic, edited those down, integrated them all into the book. Next semester, the group that came in, those videos were part of the core instructional materials that they learned from. So getting students engaged in kind of localizing, updating, making more relevant the material that you present to them is super fun. It's actually, I think, the funnest kind of assignment you can give, or most fun kind of assignment that you can give students engage in a way that they do not engage in writing 2-page compare and contrast essays.
They're writing a textbook for an audience that they know, students of the future, I guess.
And for each other, right? Like, and they're including examples from the Avengers movie or from whatever it is that just happened in their life. They're like, oh, this reminds me, this principle was actually played out on Game of Thrones last week. And so they write, they can write those kinds of things where if it was me, like what would I'd be writing, Raiders of the Lost Ark or something. Who watches the great old classics?
Well, they are going to make a new version of that series, but yes,
let's not talk about that. but anyway, the answer to your question is, with these permissions, you can engage the students in improving their own content for themselves and for each other, and they see value and engage in that in a way that they just simply don't when you say, write me a 2-page compare and contrast essay, or take this 10-item quiz, or whatever it might be that you do.
Yeah, no, we had an article about this idea of like the students writing the textbook, which at first just it feels, just on its face it almost feels wrong, of like contradictory. It's like, well, wait a minute, the students, if they can write the textbook, why would they even be in the class?
Right.
But when you describe it, I guess it starts to make a little sense. But
yeah, because they're pulling information from a range of different sources, and they're not just writing a book and publishing it.
Right.
You now, in addition to grading, or instead of grading, it's kind of a mind shift. Now you're editing contributions to a multi-author volume, and some of them aren't good the first time they come through, and you give them feedback and send them back, and they write and improve it, and you get into a back and forth where you realize that it's not just about, can I spring some question on you that you'll fail, which will allow me to broaden out the bell curve of final grades in my course to make the administration happy or something. It's, let's go through this until you really get it.
Right.
And really understand it, and the result of that can go on and benefit others. And you're willing to engage in 2, 3, 4 revision cycles because you're not going to throw that work away. Mm-hmm. You're going to be listed as a co-author, one of dozens of co-authors on this book that is now used at other universities around the country because it's the only book that exists in this little niche graduate level market. Right? So they invested in this different way.
At this point, what's the biggest barrier to that kind of thing catching on further?
So there's this leap of faith issue, like why would they be, if they could write a textbook, why would they be in the class, right? So there's not great understanding, I think, about what we mean when we talk about working in this way. And actually, I think that the biggest barrier is the big barrier to OER itself, which is just that people don't know that OER exists. When they do hear that OER exists, they hear, oh, a free textbook, because that's how they're often talked about or portrayed. to get them to the point where they realize that open means permissions, and permissions mean now I can do things I couldn't do before, and it's a couple of ands down the road to get them to thinking about redoing their assessment strategy. And it is the case that it is a lot quicker to just tell everybody, I'll write 2 pages, compare and contrast blogs versus wikis or whatever it is, and I just grade those while I watch football and hand them back or something. It's a different level of commitment to get them into small groups and to have them propose the kinds of improvements they want to make and help them figure out whether those are the right ones or the wrong ones and approve them, and then they do work and then you revise. And it's certainly more work for you, and it's more. Yeah, and it's more work for them. But man, it's so much more fun than what you were doing before. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to open this up to questions. If you're out there and want to ask a question via video or by text, it looks like we got a text popping up here. I'll read this. I think people can see it, but bear with me. Can you share, David, can you share some info on the Follett-Lumen partnership and what the mission of that is?
Yeah, I think the goal there is to make it significantly easier for a much larger group of students to be able to use OER.
Remind us what this partnership is, too.
So Follett is a company that manages campus bookstores.
A lot of them, right?
Something about a little more than a third of all the campus bookstores in the country. And they've developed some technology to make it easy for faculty to review digital products. And from Pearson and McGraw or whoever, and they all live in there together. Faculty can review them, decide they want to use this one, essentially click a button and have it show up in the LMS ready for them to teach through. And so a big part of the Follett-Lumen partnership is to put OER on equal footing with the Pearson, the McGraw, and now there's this OER that's been curated and pulled together by Lumen. And you can look at all those and review them, and with one button now you can adopt OER just as easily as you could any of the other digital materials that were there before. And Lumen always has, capacity constraints. We work with about 150 schools now, and we're hiring new people all the time so that we can work with more. And this partnership with Follett gives us access to 1,300 stores worth of people that are out there already working with faculty, that have relationships, that are helping them look at and review and adopt digital products. And it's just going to amplify the degree to which OER is on faculty members' radars, the degree to which it gets in front of students, things like that.
Is the textbook going to die? Is there going to be no textbooks in 5-10 years?
Well, at the
risk
of sounding academic, what do you mean by textbook?
I mean the idea of a publisher putting out a book that is not OER that is available for sale, whether it's digital or not digital.
No, there will always be people doing that. I believe that's true. I do think that if you look at the example of Linux, you come back to Red Hat again. Well, not to Red Hat, but to Linux.
Right.
Linux did not put Microsoft out of business, but it did force Microsoft to behave in some different ways. We're sitting in front of a room full of Macs here. We know that Mac OS X at the bottom is BSD. It's just value added on top of open source here as well. So what open source does to the ecosystem is really interesting, the way that those forces all have to adjust and balance each other. I think open content will have a bigger impact in the textbook market than open source did in the operating system market, just because it's so much less expensive. And study after study after study is showing that the learning outcomes, regardless of which one you look at, are either the same or better. And it will be harder and harder for faculty to argue, student, you should buy this $180 textbook, when the student knows that their roommate is in another section using OER instead, and that section is going to have a higher pass rate than the section where they've assigned the $180 materials. And students are smart and look at costs, and they vote with their feet. We already see in schools where there are significant OER adoptions happening that if there's 12 sections of college algebra and 10 of them are not OER and 2 of them are, then those 2 will fill and wait list, and the others will kind of bounce along in terms of enrollments. And people say, I need that class to graduate, but I don't need it $180 bad. Like, I don't need it this semester. I'll take it next time. Right. And so as a faculty member, when your enrollment starts to dip, when other faculty members' enrollments are capping out, wait listing, that actually creates some market pressure for faculty that they've never experienced before. And I think some faculty members find it upsetting, and I can understand where they're coming from with that. But I think over time, if you think about, I'm asking students to spend money in support of their learning. At some point, you have to be able to justify why are you not using OER. At some point, OER just becomes the default for a lot of these classes. And to do something different, there has to be some pretty extraordinary argument.
So it's not a going away of the old, but a tipping from one to the other being made, which would be a big change.
It would be a huge change. Yeah.
How long till we get there? I can't resist asking.
Well, I think that I think that question is actually answerable for community colleges.
Okay.
I think that what is it? 2017. Well, right now, right?
Today, yes, today. 2017. I was like, I thought your meeting would happen this year.
No,
I don't think so.
Trying to figure out where I am.
It's 2017
timeline. Yeah, thank you. It seems like 5 to 7 years is realistic. As I mentioned before, there are about 80 of these full degree programs that are either up and running or on their way.
Sure.
Every one of those programs puts price pressure on the other programs that are geographically close to it.
Yeah.
So if you live in an urban area, there's probably 2 or 3 community colleges that you could choose to go to. If you live in a big urban area, there are even more than that. And if it's 25% cheaper to get your BA in business over here than it is to get it over there, then you're going to go over here. And OER is going to be a competitive advantage in terms of drawing and attracting students. And once that happens at one school, then other schools in the region have to kind of adjust in order to compete. It's that ecosystem thing balancing itself out again. I think there really is almost an epidemiology of how OER adoption propagates out that way.
Kind of a zombie apocalypse of goodness.
Of goodness.
In your view. Well, I think we're about at time, and I really thank you for joining us and sharing your perspective today, David. It's been a pleasure.
It's fun, yeah, and I love the zombie apocalypse of goodness. I'm going to stick with that, I think, in the future.
We may have a headline. Very good. All right, and thanks everybody for sticking with us and being part of this experiment. That's a nice thank you from someone out there.